host, Luke Quitz, and welcome to the first episode ever of Roast Babble with your guest, distinguished roaster, comedian, writer, Jay Light. Welcome to the program, Jay.
Thank you for having me. First episode. Oh my God. What an honor, kicking it off.
That's it. I couldn't think of anyone better to have on, especially with this being a roast battle style podcast, or at least not style, but about, for certain.
The Roast Battle fan universe.
The community at large.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to tell these people a little bit about who you are.
Cool.
If they don't know already. People are sleeping on your career right now, I think. You've been on 2 seasons of Roast Battle on Comedy Central. You were featured in LA Weekly, and they called you eclectic, which I find interesting. You wrote a short film that was screened at Cannes.
Yep.
Degree in media and arts entertainment.
Yep.
You've performed at countless comedy festivals. You've been on HBO, Discovery, Fox, the CN. You've been a part of celebrity roasts that a lot of people will recognize. Who have you written for celebrity roasts?
The roasts I helped write for, I contributed jokes for Alec Baldwin roast. I contributed for the Justin Bieber roast, Rob Lowe, the roast of Tom Brady. And that was working on historical roasts for Netflix as well. So it's celebrities in that vein. We're talking, we're writing jokes for Hitler. We're writing jokes for Martin Luther King Jr.
You've written for all the greats now.
Yeah. One of my favorite jokes that ever made it into a roast was a joke I wrote for Hitler for the historical roasts. There's this part at the very beginning of that episode. It was a roast of Anne Frank episode. And Jeff was the roast master for all those episodes, Jeff Ross.
Right.
And he said something to the effect of he looked over at Hitler and he was like, "Hitler, you look nervous." And the joke I had was, "I think I left the oven on." And getting to watch Gilbert Gottfried as Hitler deliver that joke was just like very fun, very surreal.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's like a big full circle career moment as a comedian, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was cool.
Man, okay. We're not done with your bio though. Like we took a pit stop to have a pee there. Comedy album. You put out a comedy album. You were a part of that era.
Yes, I did an album back in I recorded it in 2019. It was released in 2020. Went with a partnership between All Things Comedy and 800 Pound Gorilla. The album was called, it still is called, it's out there. It's called Good Guy with a Gun. And that was the last album. And then the special that I just released is coming out as an album in February, if you're an audio type and you don't like watching things.
Nice. So that's going to be available for download as well?
Yes. February 10th, I believe. It will be either available for pre-sale or available. So I remember that much. So keep your eyes peeled for that date.
Hell yeah. For those that don't know, Jay just put out a 40-minute special called "My Wife Hates These Jokes," and it's fucking hilarious. It's
Thank you.
Yeah, good work, man. There's great writing all over it. It's it shows that that you took the path you took. Like it feels like the top of that hill.
Yeah, it feels, especially, it's funny because I'm like reading the comments and seeing what people are saying about it. And there's a lot of praise, which is really nice. And then there's a few people who are like, "Why are you starting this special off with jokes about what you look like and like 5 minutes of jokes about wearing glasses?" And I'm like, I come from a background of like so much of thinking about people's appearances, including my own, because of Roast Battle. And I feel like because of the way that I've approached joke writing as a byproduct of being involved with Roast Battle for so long, that it just felt natural. Like those bits, like that chunk of glasses material didn't just come out all fully formed. Like that was built over many years and had to be tweaked and refined. And I know it's silly, but that's how writing works, right? Like sometimes you just stack the stuff and then it builds, and then all of a sudden you find yourself with like, oh, I've got 5 minutes about wearing glasses. It is what it is.
I honestly, I appreciated it. It sort of set the tone in you had a line that you kept falling back on. And it was, I know that. I know what I look like. I know
Exactly.
that. And that harkened back to comedians of old. Like you had a catchphrase. You know, there's technique that's attached to it. It's not just 5 minutes about glasses. You're building during that 5 minutes.
Exactly. I'm setting up stuff so that way I'm calling back to it later. It's comedy writing 101. You got to make sure that you have I think one of the things that I have always appreciated about stand-up comedy, and my favorite comedians in particular, are people who are you can tell that they're sort of literary in their approach almost, and there's a strong base of good writing. And I feel like when I started doing stand-up, I approached it from more of a writer's brain than a performer's brain. And as a byproduct of that, I have these very like writerly, like layered jokes, which I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but like that's fine because that's what I like to do. I like to do stuff that has, there's subtle things here and there. Like I remember there's this joke off my first album. There's a run in there about that's like the 2% milk line. So I remember I had this joke, and it's literally just like we start off with saying with the 2%, what is it, 23andMe. 23andMe, yeah. I'm 2% milk, and then I just rattle off like dairy pun after dairy pun. And I remember that coming together, and there's subtle lines that I threw in there that like I knew that not everybody was even going to get, like when I said queso, because that's a cheese reference. It's queso.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing when I posted that joke on like TikTok and Instagram and stuff, and people caught on to that. And they're like, "Oh my god, I see what he's doing." That's just that's the kind of thing that I really like about what my style of comedy affords the audience.
Would you say that helps you find your specific audience, or that more it limits your reach?
I think it's just about finding your audience, like I feel like my job as a comedian, and this is, by the way, advice that I am cribbing from one of my favorite people who's ever taught me anything comedy related, this guy, Eric Moneypenny, who teaches a great sketch class here in Los Angeles. He said that the whole point of comedy to a large degree is like, you're going to take what you think is funny, and then the audience is going to think what they think is funny. Your job is to go whenever you find what the interlap is, the sweet spot, point at that and go for that, right? And so I think I've done my end of the bargain, which is showing up with a special worth of jokes. And if you are in the audience and you see that and you're like, oh, cool, I like this, great. And if you don't, great news. There are literally hundreds of other comedians out there who I'm sure you will love.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That brings me to something I wanted to ask you. When you go on stage, I know that for all of us, it's a little bit different. Like for some people, it's chaos in the moment, 3 drinks in kind of thing. But for others, it's a very calculated set of movements. Deliveries are rehearsed, even inflections in specific words. So with all that in mind, is there specific advice that anyone gave you that you bring with you on stage every time you go up?
Specific advice. There's a couple things. One of the early on, I was somebody, for context, who used to take all of my whenever I was going to do a set. I would take every single joke that I was going to do, and I would plan a complete set list for every set that I did, no matter how long, no matter how short. And I think that that's like not an uncommon thing to do. I think I still see plenty of comedians who do that. And I remember at one point there was this guy who saw me prepping my set list, and it couldn't have been for longer than maybe like a 7 or 8 minute set. And he looked at me, he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm preparing my set list." And he goes, "You know your jokes. Don't write it. Don't do that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And that is something that goes through my head all the time. It's just like, oh, you're going to be fine. You know your jokes. Like, you know what you're supposed to say here. Now, I found the thing that works for me is not going completely free form. I love to do crowd work. I love to riff around. I love to talk to the audience, which is other great comedy advice of if you're going to do crowd work, have the material to back it up. Don't just do crowd work just to do crowd work. You gotta be going somewhere, which I see so many people forget
I've been
not
seeing
know.
that go wrong on an epidemic level lately. It's
so
it's
bad.
good.
It's
really bad when it's musical comedy.
Oh my God. Musical comedians doing crowd work and not knowing where it goes. I can't even imagine. But I find that what works best for me now is like sort of a hybrid approach where I'm doing sort of, if I'm working on something new, I want to have guardrails. So it's like, I know I'm going to do this joke at some point in the set. And I'll sit down and I'll like take notes and be like, all right, before I go on stage, I just want to make sure I hit this thing. I hit this thing. Where they go in the set doesn't really matter because all I need to do is do them at some point because then I'm going to get the data I need. But the rest of it, it's just like, cool. It's up for fair game. I can start however I like. I can close however I like, as long as I know I'm hitting the actual points that I need to hit in order to like develop the new material or see if it works in a certain order. That's what matters the most to my approach now. But not overthinking it, not over planning it. That's the main major piece of advice that I keep in my head a lot.
Right. Yeah. It seems like, and I see that a lot too. The pre-written set lists and people just going through the very well rehearsed routines with very little crowd work. But there's it takes the audience out of the moment if you are not sharing that moment with them a little bit, is what it feels like to me.
Yeah, exactly. Like frankly, when I was doing the special, there are jokes that I had planned on recording in the special that I did not get to. I had them in the set list. I'd been practicing not the exact order, but like roughly the order. I'd been working it out over the prior couple of months leading up to the taping. And then there are jokes that I wound up not even recording and putting down in the special just because I was having more fun in the moment doing crowd work and riffing and in some of these moments that you see in the special that wound up, I think, playing a lot better than me just doing like, oh, I got to make sure I hit this joke. I got to make sure I hit this joke. I think giving myself room to call audibles and not be tied 100% to the material has opened me up to be a much freer performer, which is that's the hardest thing for me is not coming off as like too rehearsed or robotic.
Honestly, to my mind, when I watched your special, it felt authentic. You volunteer so much about yourself. You're not out there with a super ego like your Andrew Dice Clay. You're Jay Light on that stage. You're not. I mean, a lot of it may be persona. I don't know. We're just meeting, but it seems authentic. You know, like you walk out from behind the curtain. And speaking of crowd work, in that 5 minutes with glasses, you might just be looking for an in to start that 5 minutes, but you start your special with crowd work.
Mm-hmm.
Like
I like to start every set by doing crowd work if I can, because you get connection.
Okay, so you want to start by linking yourself to that audience, like putting yourself in that room with them.
Yeah, as much as I can. And that's something that I developed after COVID. Like that's something I started doing. Because I used to run this show with a buddy of mine. It was an outdoor show. It was like right when COVID lockdown ended, or was starting to lift in LA at least. And I had not been doing any open mics, and I still had to do this weekly comedy show. And so I was like, okay, I don't want to be doing, if I'm hosting, I don't want to be doing the same set every time for these people. So what can I do to make sure that I'm working in new material or not doing something that feels stale for me as a performer? So I started to get into the habit of trying to just start with what was right there in front of me, whether that was crowd work or whether that was talking about something that had happened to me that day, or like sometimes because we were a two host show, so like I would host the second half sometimes and I would come back talking about like something that had happened in the first half of the show. And that I think was a much needed change up for me, because then I was able to connect with the crowd better, and it felt better as a performer to be able to do that.
I mean, I'm a very analytical person too. I think in fields of probability, but I'm not meticulous about it. Like, I understand that there's a lot of chaos involved in all of this. You can only control what you can control, type of thing, right?
Exactly.
But putting yourself in the same reality as your audience, that's a very, very cool tool for growth, because not only are you getting outside yourself with your material, you're really trying to be empathetic with that audience versus just broadcasting at them.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
You are there with them, and you can tell when a performer is there present with you versus when they're on autopilot.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I'm I'm going through a bit of that with the podcasting.
I mean, that's podcasting, though. You got a plan, you're talking to it a little bit, but this is, those are the guardrails. You got to have the guardrails sometimes, and then you can go off in between.
There's a lot of similarity. I mean, in the end, it's all just hosting. Like, our next episode, I recorded it yesterday with Dan Wicks, and we talk about that, how, like, yeah, okay, there are differences between judging a roast battle and participating in it, but in the end, it's all just hosting, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to be a good host. They have to trust you as a performer in order to appreciate your comedic sensibilities,
And
or
building that.
totally distrust you on the other end, I guess.
Exactly. But they have to, I think it's not even, sometimes it goes beyond, like, not beyond trust, like maybe a step back behind trust, because hosting, they got to trust you. I think if you're just performing or judging, it's more almost like they just need to understand you. They don't need to get everything that you're doing. They don't necessarily need to like you, but they need to really understand exactly who you are, which I think some of the best, not only the best comics, but the best roast battlers and people in the world of Roast Battle League really understand, because they find a way to make it clear who they are through every single joke or every item of critique that they offer up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, everything they say, they can't help but act authentically as themselves. I love when people put that on the front page. It's like there's a vulnerability that inspires that empathy. Like, you have
Mm-hmm.
to make yourself just a little bit vulnerable, even if it's like, oops, I farted.
Yeah.
Like, that's enough for most people.
Yeah. That's vulnerability, I think, can come in different ways too for stand-ups. Like some people I think go vulnerable by being really autobiographical in their material. And I think other people are vulnerable by letting themselves not have the net of a planned material chunk or a planned set. Whatever it takes for you to be vulnerable and with the crowd, that I think is the most important thing. I mean,
So,
well, making them laugh is the most important thing above all of that stuff. But if you're vulnerable, it'll make them easier. They'll laugh a little bit easier at what you're doing, I think.
Some great words I heard recently were is it's not about you when you're performing, it's about them. So you really, yeah, you do have to put yourself in people's shoes. Like, I mean, if you are a niche comic, for instance, then you have to unpack that there's a niche for people even at times.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they go in expecting Larry the Cable Guy, and you're Mr. Highbrow. It's gonna take a little bit of translation. I really like the idea that it's that being an effective communicator can make you an effective performer.
Absolutely. If they are not clear on what you're saying, then you are not going to be able to get them over the finish line. Like, that's one of the things I see a lot of young comics. That's like the big struggle, right? And I think this goes across for roast battle too. Like, if your joke, the setup should be crystal clear. It should be absolutely, there's no wiggle room as to what the setup of your joke is, what it means. Because if that's not the case, the punchline will not land. Like, I was talking to this guy.
Yeah.
There's this guy who is a door guy at the mothership. His name's Law. Very funny guy. He and I were talking about comedy writing and our different approaches to comedy writing. He's a one-liner guy. So he literally has a approach where he thinks about, like, the punchline is at the end. Sometimes he'll work punchline first, and then you do misdirect and setup. And he will not, like, even attempt to try a joke if on his end the writing is not filled in all three of those points. That's how clear you got to be. You got to be that clear with yourself too. Like, you have to understand, when I do a joke, I have to know what I'm talking about, because if I don't know what I'm talking about, the crowd is definitely not going to know what I'm talking about. They're not going to know what I'm saying, and we're all going to just be lost.
So you could say that in another way as going in with clear intentions.
Mm-hmm. You got to be clear. Clarity is incredibly important.
I 100% agree with that. In any plan, in a business, in a relationship, in anything. It's like, what do you want out of this situation?
Yeah.
You know, do you want to be loved by all? Do you want to be rich and powerful? Do you want to make these people laugh? Like, what are your values? Because that audience rips right through false personas 90% of the time.
Yeah.
And can sense that like a shark smelling blood in the water if
Exactly.
you show up inauthentic or just there's a lot of low effort comedy out there too. Something I wanted to talk about is, in order to be understood, is there a line between like going broad, you know, making those jokes that have existed forever? If you're here, then who's the door guy? You know, that sort of thing. Or you look like X throwaway celebrity from Wish, or an Ozempic joke.
Right.
That to me feels like a race to the bottom. So I'm curious about what you think about that. Like, is it simply reaching a broader audience, or is marketing stripping the art from comedy?
I totally think that marketing is stripping the art from comedy. I do think that there's a level of, because we are now, if you are someone who is chasing the algorithm on, TikTok or Instagram, whatever, the favor is always going to be towards stuff that is controversial, stuff that will get comments going and people arguing in the comments. And I think that there's, of course, like the low-hanging fruit kind of jokes too, the very obvious things.
Yeah.
Which, funny enough, I mean, from a roast battle perspective too, there's like a level of obviousness that I think works in the room of roast battle that I normally, in my own act, am not necessarily wanting to go that obvious or broad. But I do think that, like, to me, what makes the difference between like someone who's an artist and someone who is a hack is somebody who is not, if you stay true to like what you are doing and not pandering and not trying to get the audience on your if you're not writing for them in mind, like if you're writing for the audience in mind, that's when you're going to be doing the easy, obvious jokes, because you know they're going to laugh at those because you're thinking the audience is dumb. And don't get it twisted, there's a lot of dumb audiences. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Dumb audiences are just, that's part and parcel with the world, right? But you're not supposed to treat them like they're dumb. And I think that's the mistake that the hack makes, is you treat your audience like they're stupid, and then they are going to, there's this great thing I just saw somebody talk about. There's like a Vulture interview. They said if their pigs feed them slop. Which, like, okay, sure, sometimes you got to do that. But I do think that your job more often, if you're really trying to like get some artistic fulfillment, is to find ways to not be serving up slop all the time. I think that you should be trying to go just a little higher and push yourself a little further.
Or risk, and it's a big word that I was dancing around, becoming a hack comic. Like,
yeah.
You wear the scarlet letter for the rest of your life. You're Larry the Cable Guy after that.
And hey, listen, I'll say this. Hacks make money. Hacks are successful. There's a reason that some of these guys who I think most people would consider a hack are doing incredibly well, and it doesn't matter to them what people think, whether they're a hack or not, because they've got all the money that they wanted out of performing. And that is really what matters the most. You know, I think,
Yeah.
to me, I would much rather, anytime I find myself going down an avenue where I'm like writing a new joke, and if I can avoid doing the obvious thing, I will take the less obvious route. Sometimes you got to do the obvious thing. It's fine. It is what it is. But as long as you don't feel like you're compromising yourself, as long as I'm approaching it from the place of like, I actually do think this is the best thing to say, as opposed to, well, the audience is going to love it if I say this thing. That, I think, is the distinction you got to make as the comedian. That's where that's where your, whatever your true north version of that is.
So, like, reading the room and using that, there is a time and place for the low-hanging fruit. I very much agree. I think one of my favorite moments, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Effie Meadows, called someone a gay retard, and they're trans.
Yeah.
Like, it leveled the room, you know?
Exactly.
And so there is a time and place to use those effectively when reading the room, but the danger in becoming a hack, in my mind, is when those low-hanging jokes, those Ozempics and From Wishes, become your bread and butter. They become your crutch. That's when you risk being labeled a hack.
Yeah. I think that you also, as a comic, owe it to yourself. And this goes to Roast Battle too. I think you owe it to yourself. You don't have to do research on everything. You don't have to be always watching Roast Battle shows. You don't always have to be watching every special that comes out. But I do think you owe it to yourself to be like sort of aware of what the, I mean, for lack of a better term, what the like meta of comedy is at any given time. And I think that because that we live in this time now where there are so many more people putting their comedy online for free, and there are more comedy shows than ever before that you can go out and watch wherever community you live in. I think that if you want to make sure that you're doing like the most authentic version of what you are as a performer and a writer is, and that you're not potentially winding up in any sort of overlap, then you owe it to yourself as an artist to go out and consume the kind of art that you are pursuing. Because that also just helps you in the creative process. Like I just battled Julian Fernandez for the first time on in like 4 or 5 years. I battled on New Year's Eve. That battle is going to come out in a couple weeks on from when we're recording on the YouTube channel. And Julian's a big target, right? They're non-binary. They're Mexican. They're a little overweight. They've got the haircut. Exactly. They dress like that. There's a lot of stuff that I can talk about, but I knew once I started writing, I was like, okay, I'm writing all these jokes. I should for sure watch some other people's battles against Julian. So that way I am not coming close to what somebody else has already said.
Yeah, you're not reheating something, basically.
Exactly. I'm not trying to reheat anyone's dishes. I want to come correct with material that I know. Sure, there's only so many topics you're going to be able to joke about any given person in a roast battle. But as long as I feel like what I've got is good and works, that's more important than anything. And that was the way that I approached preparing for that battle. And that's kind of the way I approach doing stand-up. You know, I obviously there's plenty of people who've talked about wearing glasses over the years. There's plenty of people who've talked about some of the other topics in my special. There's people who've talked about being married. There's people who've talked about being sober.
Old condoms.
People who talked about old condoms. What I'm going to do is if I'm going to talk about that stuff, I'm going to make sure that it is stuff that like only I have the thing to say. So I'm bringing in my personal experience. I'm bringing in the story about me attempting to lose my virginity in a park when I was in high school and having a condom that I kept in my wallet because I didn't know any better. But as much as that's what I think differentiates what I've got going on is like I am bringing in my own experience in a way that nobody else theoretically is going to be talking about it the way I have. But you might find the audience relating with what you're saying because something similar has happened to them, like you and the condom. Other people who've had condoms that expired and then all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, my condom broke. I didn't realize there's an expiration date on this condom. What have I been doing?
Well, and that, in my mind, makes it great material. Like you can't shoot too low, but like you say, there has to be a bridge between what's going on in your mind as a performer, as a thinker, as an analytical person, and Buddy who just ate 3 Big Macs and wants another one. You know,
exactly.
Performing for you and building that bridge with the audience. Is it easier when you know what you're walking into in a room, or when you're going in blind and you start feeling that in the moment you come out on stage?
I like to be a little bit aware of what's going on in the room. I don't necessarily watch the entire show beforehand, but I at least watch the person right before me, or depending on like how long of a set I'm doing. Like if I'm headlining, I will at least try and watch like maybe the last 10-ish minutes of whoever is on right before me, whether that's the feature, if it's like I'm doing a long set closing a showcase, whoever's the last person on the showcase is besides me. Because I do feel like this also goes to like the crowd work part of my brain too. I see so many comedians who do crowd work, and I see this, you know, if I'm around at an entire show, who ask the same audience members the same questions. And that is so annoying to me because I know it's annoying for the audience. None of these people want to say the same thing. None of these people want to have the same conversation over and over and over again. It's so boring. So I at least try and have some awareness of what's going on. And I do think it's also, I'm not saying it's a rule that you should have, but I think it's a good idea, particularly if you're hosting, to be as open with the other people in the lineup about what the room is like. And I think that when I'm hosting, I certainly try and make it a point if people are asking like, how are they? I'm not going to mince words. If they're a shit crowd, I'll say they're kind of being a shit crowd. We're working hard tonight. We're lifting some weights. And if there's certain people who are like really good audience members, then I'll point them out and be like, this person is really fun. If you want to like talk to them, they're a really great audience member, that kind of stuff. Because I think that if you go in knowing more, then I think you're going to be able to have a better time. That's the way I have always felt. And I know not everybody feels like that, but I just think as an analytical person also, I like to know I'd like to know what I'm up against. I like to know the information.
I hate surprises.
Yeah. Oh, I hate surprises. I'm so bad at planning for them. I'm so bad at dealing with them. But I do think that if I'm in a position where like I at least know what's going on, then I can react to a surprise better. Like you'll see in the battle, there's this point where I riff a joke based on something that happened. In the moment, Julian said something, and I had this rebuttal that was like complete riff rebuttal, but it worked. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad that I at least had this playbook of like other jokes and stuff that I'd planned to say, that I was able to digest that, throw all that away, and then whenever I actually needed to come up with something on the fly, I was able to. And the thing that I said on the fly worked. So it's just like the perfect storm of all of my analysis that I go into in advance. I throw it away, and then I can still trust and be like, oh yeah, I trust in myself as a performer in a comic. I'm going to be fine.
Going a little bit broader, I am curious if you can remember your biggest bomb.
Oh boy.
And a compound question. The follow-up is, how do you gracefully deal with a bad room? So let us know your biggest bomb, and then talk a little bit about how to gracefully deal with a bad room.
Biggest bomb I ever had was my first headlining set that I can remember doing in California. It was the first time I'd been asked to headline. I was doing a show at a steakhouse in the Inland Empire somewhere between. I used to run this open mic that was in Claremont, California, and there was this regular who had a room that he'd just started, and he was like, come do headlining, come do 30 minutes. We'll feed you, we'll pay you. I was like, great. And I was going through a breakup at the time, so I was like super excited. I'd had all this breakup material, but it wasn't very good because it was so fresh. I hadn't really written enough yet. And I'm going on stage. Before the show, I'm hanging out at the bar. I'm still drinking at the time, so I was like flirting with the bartender, drinking up a storm, waiting to order my food. So excited. And then I go on stage. It's supposed to be 30 minutes. I start losing the crowd at about minute 5. And I'm bombing for about 15 straight minutes. Just nothing. And it's sad bombing. It's bombing because they feel bad for me, which is like a whole other layer of I don't want anything to do with this. I get the light. I finish my set. I leave the stage. I realize I have been lit early by 10 minutes. And the host went up and did 10 more minutes to reset the room and then end the show. That's how bad I bombed, is they needed to reset the room for a show that was ending. And then the bartender was like, I have a boyfriend, and also the kitchen's closed. Sorry. It's like, it was just the perfect storm of things. That was one of those shows where I was just like, it's so seared into my brain of like, this is just how it goes. To answer your other question, I've certainly bombed since then. That was very early for me. That was like maybe year 4 or 5 in comedy. I'm 14 years in now. I've bombed plenty of times, right? Or maybe not. Sometimes it's not even a bomb, but it's like sort of a middling set where there's peaks and valleys. I find the best way to handle a room when I am not doing well, as long as I am having fun, that I think matters more than anything else. This is another great piece of comedy advice that I got that I carry with me, especially. Don Barris, legend, at the Comedy Store, closes out all the time, warm up for Jimmy Kimmel, Windy City Heat, a wonderful comedian and human being. And he said once, you got to play to the people who like you. And first of all, if I don't like myself on stage, that's a bad sign. So if I'm in a place where I feel like I'm struggling, I need to start doing stuff that I am having fun doing, whether that is material that I'm like, I love this joke, I'm going to tell this joke, or me fucking around and riffing or doing some crowd work that's like stuff that I feel good about. I'm going to go to that route. And then also, I've bombed, but I've never bombed so hard, at least not since that time that, like I said, is seared into my brain at the steakhouse. Shout out to the Golden Spur. But I've never bombed quite so hard that there's not at least one person in the crowd who is enjoying themselves. And after a certain point, I can't care whether that person is like laughing at me or laughing with me. I just have to zero in on that person and be like, you're the person from now on. And sometimes I'll even say that. And I'll look and be like, you're my favorite audience member right now. This next joke is just for you. And then I'll do the joke just to them.
Has that ever won you the room back?
Maybe not the whole room, but it wins me more than just those people who I'm performing to.
That's
sometimes it has won the whole room, but I feel like that alone is like, you just got to play. You just got to care about the people who are liking you. Like the more I find myself like, if I'm on stage and I see somebody who's not laughing, that's the easiest thing I think for a comic to notice is someone who's not having a good time. You'll see it, you'll notice it, you'll try and make them laugh the whole show. Sometimes it's fun to when you see that person crack, you can comment on it. But acknowledging that the people who don't like you are there, it's just an anchor. It's just dragging you down.
You mentioned Don Barris and the Comedy Store. I want to segue into talking about your arc a little bit. Let's talk about the Jay Light origin story. Where did you grow up, and all the way to being a door guy? Not everyone knows this. You were a door guy at the Comedy Store. You took a very traditional route into stand-up comedy.
Yes, I certainly did. I was so I grew up mostly in the suburbs of Dallas, in a little suburb called Colleyville, sort of between Dallas and Fort Worth. I went to college in North Carolina, which is where I started comedy proper. I was interested in doing comedy in high school. I did this thing where football is huge in Texas, and we had this thing at my school where basically they were called the Pep Boys, and our whole job was to, at pep rallies before the big home football games, we would write sketches that made fun of the football players and perform them for the entire school. And
Nice.
So there was like me and some other friends of mine who were the main writers for that group. And that was the first time where I was like, oh, comedy writing, this is fun. And then I started to do stand-up. One of my friends from that, my best friend, he got this book called The Comedy Bible, which I think a lot of starting out stand-up comics get. It says, if you're going to do stand-up and open mics, you should get a comedy buddy to write with. I volunteered. And then I was off to the races after that. I still, until my junior year of college, that's when I really consider like the start for me, because that's when I started taking it more seriously. I was in North Carolina. I had a car. I could travel to shows and open mics. I was able to start a room. And then I moved. I was in film school and I graduated, and I thought, well, I'm probably going to, day job wise, wind up doing something in film and television. So let me move to a place where I can work in that lane. Let's go to LA. Didn't even know about the Comedy Store at the time.
So you went blind to LA just on the premise that that's where showbiz happens.
Yeah, I knew the Laugh Factory was huge at the time. I remember the YouTube for the Laugh Factory was really big, and I knew of course, like I started following, there's this blog called the Comedy Bureau that I was starting to follow that covered comedy in Los Angeles. And on my drive from North Carolina, I did a lot of driving that summer. I had a lot of weird jobs. I worked at like a summer camp as a camp counselor. I worked at Bonnaroo as a food truck guy. And I was driving a lot that summer. And some of that whole summer, I listened to old episodes of WTF with Mark Maron. And the episodes I wound up listening to were all Comedy Store people. Don Barris was one of those episodes. Kevin Christie was one of those episodes. It was all people who were like former door guys or people who were like longtime regulars.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, the Comedy Store sounds interesting. I had heard of it, from this podcast. Maybe I'll go check it out. And I went a couple months after the first time I was there. It was like October. I got to LA in like August. And then I was like, oh, this feels right. It's really weird. And I like this. I did work as a PA for a little while. And then I worked at this other comedy club in LA, Flappers. And then I went up about after a year and a half of living in LA, I got to audition for the club, for the store. I became a door guy. Me and Frank Castillo got hired right around the same time. We're both within 2 weeks of each other getting hired. So he and I were the last. We were the. I forget if it's like the start of a new class or the tail end of an old class. I'm not exactly sure like what range. But we both got hired in 2014. I worked as a door guy until the very beginning of 2019. So just shy of 5 years I spent as a door guy.
Wow. So that puts you in a process already. Like that's since Mitzi put that place up, it's like she was putting people at the door so that they would brush against these people, see the room, see how the comedians are acting on stage and whatnot. So what was that like? Did you know that when you were selected to be a door guy at the Comedy Store, everything that came with it?
Yeah, to some degree, yeah. Like I knew that it was a big deal. I had already been hanging out at the club enough to see what the other door guys were like and what like former door like I'd really started to invest myself in like the lore of the club at that point. And I knew it was like a legitimization for me to some degree, but really for like other people, it made the pursuit more legitimate. Like my parents who were like, didn't understand why I was pursuing stand up, didn't get it for the longest time. Once I got the job at the store, they were like, oh, we've been to the Comedy Store. Oh, that's cool. It was like, I always say this, I said this sort of to them to like get them on board, but also I think it is true. I think working at the Comedy Store is basically like doing grad school for comedians, and you are immersed among some of the best in the world. And you also get so much stage time in front of real crowds, and you learn basically like how to perform comedy in front of any kind of audience, I think, by working at the Comedy Store.
Yeah, from the outside, like I'm stuck in Canada here. I can't get over that crazy border, but it feels like an apprenticeship more than just, stamping hands.
Yeah, exactly. You are, because the other comedians who work the club know the importance of the development system and the importance of the door guy system in particular. If you're in as a door guy, you're part of the family, and everybody understands that. And that, I think, is what allows door guys to have this sort of unique history and unique position in comedy. There are certainly door guys who like don't make it, who flame out, but I do feel like if you are a door guy and you're at the store and you use that time wisely, then you're given a leg up in the future because of what is possible by working there. You learn so much about comedy, learned so much about interacting with audiences and other comedians and the business side of it. And there are so many more opportunities that were afforded to me because I was at the Comedy Store than there certainly would have been otherwise.
Right, like I mean, you're all over HBO shows. I mean, can we talk about Gordon Ramsay's? Like
Yeah.
you're all over the place now, man. You're really like the arc hasn't plateaued. You're still on a very pronounced upward curve, and it shows.
I think that the Comedy Store got me those things to some degree. Like, I got my first writing jobs off of Roast Battle. And then the continued writing jobs were because people saw me on stage and they were like, hey, we think you're funny. I'm putting a writer's room together. Come, submit for the room. And that is the work that led to the other work, that led to working on BattleBots, that led to working on MasterChef, that led to working on all of the random like one season shows that are like on my IMDb page. But all of that stuff does still have this foundation built at the Comedy Store as a door guy. I wouldn't have had those opportunities if I was not at that position. And now I just got to use all the stuff that I learned, not only as a door guy, but like the other things I've learned working in these jobs as a writer, as a producer. I have to take all of that and then go, okay, what can I continue to build and how can I continue to evolve, not only as like an artist, but also as a, being a stand-up, you're basically running a small business. You're an entrepreneur. So how can I learn like how to change the way that I do business and make sure that I'm staying relevant and afloat and not just somebody who's washing out.
That again goes back to the current meta of comedy and being aware of it. Like, I feel like the ones that go hack are the ones that decide they know what the current meta is and that meta will always be that meta.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a shifting thing. If you're not trying to smell the air, if you're not using your eyes to see and your ears to hear, it can your world can get small fast.
Yeah, I think it is the duty of an artist to be aware of what's going on in the world around you and absorb all of that so that way you can not only import it into your work, but then evolve. Allow your point of view to evolve on things. And you got to understand yourself if you really want to create work for others at a high level. If you don't know how you actually feel about stuff, or you're trying to come from this place of like, I feel this way for sure about a thing, but you haven't felt that way in 3 to 5 years, people are going to recognize that. It's obvious.
Back to authenticity. This is a great interview, Jay. Thanks again for being on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'll cut that out.
Okay.
You started hosting a game show called ROM in LA.
Yes.
A fucked up game show, which
Yes.
totally does what in my mind good comedy and good art should do, which is pulls things out of the margin and parades them.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to it, that was the train of thought. Did you take things from the first game show that you hosted and leave others behind? Like, oh, that worked from this one. Maybe I can use elements of that in my new production. Like, I feel like what you were speaking on there is that if we are growing as artists, as people, as comedians, whatever it happens to be, then we're constantly shedding skin. We're
Mm-hmm.
shedding those old parts of ourselves that don't work anymore for the current meta, and we're evolving and growing into that current meta. Okay, how does what I do fit into this?
There's certainly stuff as like the game show has evolved. We've been doing the show almost 3 years now, and it has changed a lot over those 3 years. It has drastically improved over those 3 years because there's a couple things that we've kept but a lot of it we've gotten rid of, and a lot of it we've turned over and tightened up the format and changed the way that we approach things. Even from a production standpoint of like how we approach some of the research for some of the games we do and how we present some of those games from, like graphics and the way, like the level of professional sheen that we're adding to it. But it's funny too, because like to your point about evolving, like when the idea for the game show sort of came about, because I was asked right around 20, yeah, it would have been, 3 years ago, almost 2022, right around this time. I've been asked by a venue that I do some stuff with here in LA, the Pack Theater, where I recorded my first album. Shout out. I had been asked by them. They're like, "Hey, the artistic director is looking for a roast show, and we know you've done a lot of roast related stuff over the years. Would you be interested in maybe producing something like that here?" And I was thinking about it, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do a roast show. I don't want to step on, this was before I'd been working with Roast Battle again, but I was already like, I don't want to step on the toes of Roast Battle. I already know there's other roast shows that are happening in LA. Let me think on it. Let me think if there's something that I would be interested in producing. And then I thought about it more. I was like, no roast show, done. Stand-up show. At this point, I think I've hosted and run the best stand-up show I'm ever going to do. I don't want to produce that again. I'm done. What's something else? What's something else that takes what I know how to do and makes it comedy? That also could maybe be a little bit roasty and mean. Oh, how about a game show? Let's try it out. And so then, because I got to this place where I was like, I'm only going to do something if it moves the needle for me creatively. I'm only going to run the show if I'm excited to run it. I think that kept me from being someone who, when it was asked, hey, do you want to do a roast show? Me going, great. Yep, totally. I'll do a roast show. Because I feel like it's important for me to do something that I actually give a shit about. And I'm not going to give a shit about just throwing on your average, oh, look at this roast show. It's a different roast show that's happening at a different venue in LA. Mess me with that bullshit. I'm going to do something that I care about. That's what keeps me moving at the end of the day. That's what keeps me wanting to care.
I'm a sucker for a little bit of hardline. Would you consider? Would you say that you're more concerned? I'll word it that way, with being authentic than being marketable.
I would much rather feel good about the art that I'm producing and the content that I'm producing. Ugh. But I would much rather feel good about that and feel like I've got some integrity than the other way around. Sure, I would love to sell stuff. I'd love for a TV network to all of a sudden be like, hey, we love Wrong, let's make it. But is that why I'm doing the show? No, I'm doing the show because I love the show and I think it's good. That, to me, I think is a much more important true north to follow. That's that's what I care about way more. I would much rather be somebody who the audience comes to find me or stumbles upon me than somebody who's like, look at this guy. Look at this. There's another white guy. Yeah. Look at him. Come on.
Everyone thinks they want to be the champion until they understand what the champion is. Mm-hmm. Like, the current meta, the champion is a brand. That's sort of freaking me out now, and that's another reason for starting to interview people and put my ear to the ground and see what's happening currently in comedy, not just in roast battle across American cities, but like globally. Is this happening? Are we facing a large shrinkage of the gray area? Mm-hmm. You know,
I actually, to me, it seems like I don't think it's getting. I don't think it's shrinking, but I do think it's getting deeper. And I think that the optimistic view that I take on it is because there is so much more opportunity out there to post your own stuff. Sure, there's a lot more stuff out there. You might have trouble cutting through the noise, but you also have so many more people out there who are able to find you. You have so many people out there who are like capable of even stumbling upon you than you did before, which is incredible for artists of all kinds, whether you're a comedian, a musician, a painter, or a writer, all of that. There's the gray area is not necessarily, I think what's marketable is going to get snapped up sometimes, but there's also, I would say, a lot of probably pretty marketable motherfuckers that are in the gray area just deeper down, and somebody, maybe will pluck them out someday. But otherwise, hey, as long as you're out there continuing to develop your craft and make art that you feel good about and do stuff that you feel like is authentic and not trying to work with the audience in mind, that's the most important way to go about it, I think.
Wise words from one of LA's up and comers. We've got this far, and we keep saying the words roast battle, but we haven't really talked about something that I'd like to unpack for people, because again, this idea of gray area has come up, and now that the Roast Battle League official brand is expanding into a global brand, a lot of the fans seem to be looking for transparency within the organization that isn't as readily available as they would like. So can you speak to what your official affiliation with the Roast Battle League is and what that entails at your end?
I am the director of programming for the Roast Battle League. I rejoined back in the summer, and what my job basically entails working to make sure that the final product that we're putting out is podcast level and live show level, high quality. I also, as director of programming, am somebody who's like keeping an eye out for other things that we can be putting on the RBL channel that are ways to highlight more than just what LA does, right? Like, I think what makes RBL Weekly so compelling as a podcast is because it does such a great job of highlighting other roast battles in other cities. Like, for years, if you were a fan of roast battles at all, you got to see the Comedy Central version of the show, which featured comics largely from LA and New York, or you maybe saw the Periscope, which was only in LA, or you maybe saw the Roast Masters shows, which are only New York battlers for the most part. A couple of LA battlers went over there. Me, Keith Carey, Pat Barker, like, our battles are on YouTube somewhere from the Roast Masters shows. However, RBO Weekly explodes everything, and you can see stuff from all over the world. And I think what we're trying to do, what I'm keeping an eye out for at least, is how can I showcase people and roast battles from within the world of roast battle, with the worldwide league. There are so many shows out there. There's so many things. Like, we've got the Roast Masters revival that we just dropped on the channel a couple weeks ago. We are looking to get some of the shows from Edinburgh Fringe. We're looking to get some of the shows from Tokyo Roast Fest to put all the full shows on the channel. Obviously, we're dabbling in specials now. We just dropped mine. We are, because of the way that it's succeeding, we are starting to go, okay, who else from the world of roast battle maybe would be right to have a special on the channel? And so that's the kind of thing that I am actively keeping an eye out for. And I just want to make, the live version of the show, whether that's here, whether that's in New York, whether that's in Austin, whatever city, I'm trying to help be a resource for them. I want to make sure that, with the programming that I'm thinking about, is what's online and what is live. That is what the programming is. So I'm trying to oversee all of that to the best of my abilities and help increase brand visibility and also the quality of the product at the end of the day. Yeah, now we're getting into the marketing talk. Now we're getting into all of the YouTube jargon that I've learned from watching Colin and Samir videos for the last 3 months while I'm trying to be like, okay, how can I be better at my job?
Man, talking about YouTube videos, I just want a point of information. You have over 600 YouTube videos, man. I don't think anyone can accuse you of being a lazy performer at this point.
It's so many podcasts. It's so many podcast episodes. It's so many wrong episodes now. There's all sorts of weird stand-up stuff on there.
You hosted a podcast dethroning cinema at a point,
Yeah.
which I find very interesting. I'm an artist myself. That doesn't matter, but the idea of dethroning cinema, it's very interesting to me that that's something you chose to pull on after moving to LA.
Well, I think that there's people who are so afraid of, first of all, not having their true opinion out there about like a movie or a TV show or a comic or something like that, right? And also there's so many people who get so worried about being liked and who get so worried about their art being liked. And I think if you are afraid of somebody not liking you, then you are completely going to be operating out of this place of fear that is not good for your creativity. And I think it's okay to not like stuff. I don't know why everybody gets so weirded out when people don't like things. That's what I love about the podcast that I used to have, which is me saying, hey, you don't like this thing. It's okay to not like this thing. That's totally fine. I just saw Wicked. I did not like Wicked. I love the musical. I love the stage musical version. I didn't think this was a good adaptation. That's fine. I don't care. I'll go on record with that. I'm not going to be mad if somebody's like, wow, that's crazy that you didn't like Wicked. I will be mad if somebody's like, I can't believe you said you didn't like Wicked. I'm not going to hire you. It's so silly. It's so dumb Hollywood nonsense.
Yeah, there's a huge wave of outing people for not homogenizing. Like free thinkers are. What do you mean you don't like that? What you don't like that kind of burger, dude? How could you not like that?
Mm-hmm.
It's a personal choice. It's my choice.
Yeah.
Not the choice of society's.
You gotta give people the if you want to have people what's the best way to put this? This is something, I'm a sober person, and this is something that I've learned from like the world of being a sober person who's worked in like 12-step programs and recovery for that amount of time. One of the things that I've learned that I really hold as like a core value for me is you got to let people have the dignity of their own experience. And if your experience is you don't like the same thing that I like, or you don't like the thing that I created, that's fine. I'm not going to try and change your mind. That's a fruitless effort. You have your thing, enjoy your experience, and I'll go do my thing and enjoy my experience. And it doesn't change the fact that we're both still here. Like, we're still living. We're still on this weird planet that probably from a statistical standpoint should not exist, but we're here. Hey, look at that.
I agree. Yeah, like we're all in this together one way or another. In my mind, it's definitely branching on revealing a lot of my personal philosophy as well. But I feel like there's a big division there, but with the proper bridges being built and the proper care and attention and intention, that bridge can be made.
Yes.
What buries me and hurts me so much is, and I think I even said these words in another interview, is seeing people having the same party every weekend without growth.
Mm-hmm.
That's a plateau. It's a choice to start dying in my mind. And that is, again, why I'm out here interviewing guys like What Makes You Tick.
You're speaking my language, buddy.
Now, how did it come about getting back to the structural organization of the current RBL meta. Haha. Um, who approached you and said, "Do you want to be a part of this?"
Moses did. For those of you who are in the RBL community who might not be aware, I helped. So I told it started at the Comedy Store in 2014, but I started hanging out in the Comedy Store in 2013. That's when I really started like being a part to some degree of the club. I was not a door guy, I was not in development, but I was hanging out, and I was particularly at Roast Battle. Frank and I were basically helping do like some of the tech stuff for the room. Frank was DJing before Coach T became a guy, and I was running the live feed on Periscope on this janky phone, and I was there every week. And over time, that evolved into me taking more of a active position as a producer and booker of the show itself, the stand-ups and the battlers. When I started getting professional TV writing work, I left. I didn't have the time or the energy to produce the show anymore. But I have this deep background in producing Roast Battle as a show and in being involved and seeing how it works in a lot of different ways. And so it felt like when Moses asked me to join, it was basically like saying, hey, come back into the fold. I think this is a way that we could have you involved in the show that would make a lot of sense. And, Pat and I go way back. So I think he and I and Moses all have seen the show from such a young version of it to see it to where it is now. We all understand, I think, on a really good level, hey, this is what the show has been like. This is where the show can continue to grow. And also, this is where we can have the show continue to grow without losing what makes the show so special. And I think that is something that, from a programming side, we are really trying to provide, is this experience when you're watching the live, the taped version of the show. Obviously, nothing's ever going to beat the live experience of being at the Roast Battle live. That's just live performances. I think everybody who's seen a live show versus a taped show knows that. But we want to try and come to capturing the experience as close as we can. And that's something that I think all of us are on board with. Because we know what the true potential of the live show is. And that is something that I think none of us have ever actually lost sight of.
This is the type of transparency that I love seeing in this organization. We don't have a spreadsheet or a page on the website where we can say, okay, here's the president, here's the director of programming, here's the creator, here's the man in charge of the Patreon. Like, all of those roles are hidden to the general public until they're not. So thank you for unpacking that.
Of course.
Back to your special, because really that's what we're here to talk about. I mean, this episode's going to drop in a couple of weeks here, and your special is hot off the digital cameras.
Yes.
So I've written down a list of short form things that I wanted to talk about in your special, like the I Know What I Look Like, for instance. That seems very intentional to me. Was there a performance that inspired that?
Yes. I was, at the beginning of last year, I was asked to do a taping for OnlyFans. OnlyFans has started doing stand-up. Some of you, if you're comedy fans, you might have seen posting about that. In the OnlyFans set, I had known I was going to do some of the glasses stuff. And what I was told, because of stipulations on the platform, you're not allowed to make references to people being under a legal age. Okay. And because I knew so much of that joke hinged on saying stuff about like me in middle school, me in high school, I didn't want to reference any of that stuff or go afoul of the guidelines that I'd been asked to put upon by the taping. So I modified and I was like, okay, let's come up with a bunch of stuff. Let's do a bunch of I look likes. I know and hit those and do that. And then that when I was revising that set, that wound up becoming a runner as I was running that material again. And I was like, okay, cool. This is the joke now. This is like the built-in callback that I have sprinkled in throughout the set. So it kind of came out of necessity. You know, it was a real actual necessity is the mother of invention moment.
I love when the thread carries through, you know, like
Yeah.
it's great that we spoke about authenticity and here you are demonstrating authenticity in the middle of it. Growing up with glasses, growing up on the outside, that has to have been formative in a way for the comedy and that driving an okay, I'm still worthy, like, you know, this I can still be accepted for who I am, for my mind, for my authentic self, regardless of these people calling me slurs for someone with glasses.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, you know, I was bullied as a kid, and I was definitely somebody who like felt sort of like an outcast, especially because when I was very young, I was moving around schools a lot. My dad was in the military, so we had to move around a lot when I was really young. I mean, thankfully, I had friends in one of my best friends in middle school. We've remained very good friends to this day, and he and I were both like, he was the new kid. He just transferred from a school. He and I both the first day we were like locked in. We're like, we're friends now because nobody else is talking to us, and we gotta be pals. And so it was good to have that. And like I expanded my friend group over time. I think because I was just like maybe not necessarily looking for the other outcast weirdo kids, but maybe I just found myself sort of more attracted to those groups. Like I did legitimately for years try and be a popular kid and like hang out with the popular kids, but I was just getting bullied by those kids. I was just the punching bag of those groups. And as soon as I started being with people who around and hanging around people who were like, you know, freaks and weirdos, then I stopped getting bullied, except in like a couple circumstances in like class or like at the lunchroom or whatever, right? But I'm not also having to be hanging out with people and then feeling bad about myself the whole time because of the bullshit that they're saying. It's just a nicer way to treat yourself. Yeah.
So then your young self, your, you know, 14 to 16 to 18, whatever year old self must have been thinking forward a little bit to that. Like, I mean, after in your bio, you talk about late at night when mom and dad think you're asleep, having the volume low and listening to the Adult Swim, the Comedy Central, all that. So it feels to me like a picture sort of being painted there of like a young man developing his ideas for what's next.
Man, I don't even know if I was thinking that far ahead. I think it was just like, hey, this is I think I was developing my sense of humor and allowing myself to find that. I didn't know that I was going to be doing comedy professionally, but I definitely at least was like something about the way I live feels different than the world around me. I'm not going to be afraid of that. I'm not going to run from that. I will at least find myself, if I have questions about the world around me, I'm not going to not ask those questions, and I'm not going to not follow those threads. I'll pull them and let them unravel a little bit.
So was your decision to get a degree in media arts and entertainment a sort of narrowing of that lens?
Yeah, I think that I had this sort of vague idea of what I wanted to do when I went into college. I knew I was like, okay, I'm going to get a communications degree. I was a theater kid. I knew how to do public speaking. I knew how to perform. I didn't want to be an actor. I didn't apply to theater school. I'm like, okay, what can I do with this? I like movies. I like TV shows. I like writing. See where that goes. And then I wound up learning about through having that major. I learned about like, oh, there's this whole world that's open to you of like jobs that you could have. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, I'll go potentially do one of those. That sounds fun. And then, of course, all of the other options started to be like picked away. Like, oh, maybe you're going to be a photographer. Really shitty photography teacher makes you hate the art of doing photography. Not happening anymore. Oh, maybe I'll be a DJ. You're not as good of a DJ as you could be. You're kind of bullshit and you're only good at frat parties. Throw it away. And then eventually, I winnow down all the other stuff and I get to where I'm at now. I remember it was just like all vagueness until all of a sudden then it becomes clear. That's kind of the way that it's felt for me.
That's great. I love that there's layers. Like with any kind of writing, like I come from the Channel 101 school, and that
Oh yeah.
is a whole different thing. But they introduced Dan Harmon specifically introduced, and he calls it the Dan Harmon story circle. But it's the hero's progress. It's the epic journey. Like it starts with getting to know the hero, then they face conflict. That conflict goes away. But that story, that format of the story circle is universal to most hero arcs. Titans, the Herculeses of the world and whatnot, the Samsons. So it's very cool to get a little inside insight on your personal arc.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, you did comedy on OnlyFans. I was gonna mention that, but like, what the fuck? The world has changed.
The world has changed.
You've given up drugs.
Yes.
And the analytical makes sense. You said you liked mushrooms a lot when you did do drugs.
Oh yeah.
Very interesting that you do have a background with psychedelic substances and now are an analytical person.
Oh yeah. No, I loved psychedelic shrooms, acid, all that stuff was super fun. And I do feel like it does. I think those experiences like softened me and made me a little bit more. I think there's certainly a level of self-awareness that I developed more through those experiences. But then because, reflecting, because I had that self-awareness, then that allows me to go down into myself and take the journey of like, okay, what else is there here? What else can I learn? What's serving me? What's not serving me? What do I actually believe? What do I care about? What are the lies that I'm telling myself? What are the voices in my head that are not actually my voice? Whose voice is that? Like that's the kind of stuff that I started to, maybe the inklings of those things started to come up the more times I did some psychedelics. Which I have no desire to do those now. I feel like I've gotten everything I need out of them. If I were ever at a point where like for some reason I decide to like pick up doing drugs again, those would be the ones that I would go to. But I also think that that's because it's like, oh, I understand the therapeutic aspect here. I understand what could be what can be understood and accessed if you're doing this in a way where you are approaching it with like a somebody who's here to help you out or to guide you. But yeah,
so much like we were talking about with comedy, going into it with intention, you might say.
yes, look at that. That is what we call a story, a roast babble story circle.
uh You talk about getting old, man. Speaking of that, yeah, I'm getting old. You're talking about getting old a little bit on your special, and okay, you look. We're going a little deeper here, Jay.
Hit
You
me.
mentioned quitting porn.
Yes.
Did you?
No. I did. The longest I ever did go in that run of trying to quit was a week. I've quit. I've not watched porn for longer than that, but like
Well,
I
you
do.
have a wife now.
Well, jerking off when you've got a significant other in the house. It's complete. It's like you're jerking off when you're a teenager again. You're like, "No, I can't make a noise."
Fast
Um,
closes of the laptop and whatnot.
exactly. Yeah, you gotta keep one dry hand so that way you can hit your keyboard and alt tab out of there. Um, but I definitely watch less, and I don't watch the same kinds that I used to because I'm like, this is there's no thanks. Like I have toned it down on the gangbangs, and that is something that's growth, I think.
We're coming up on freckle past a mole hair here. So, do you have anything to plug? Any social media that you want the people to know about? What's going on, Jay?
I mean, you can see what I'm up to at Diet J on Instagram. At Wrong Game Show on Instagram is where we do all of the stuff for the game show. I will be performing. I'm going to try and perform as much as I can around the world this year. I know Wrong we're taking out on the road a little bit more, so keep your eyes peeled for that. I have a newsletter that I do weekly. It's about comedy and recovery, and I do a lot of recommendations, and I write about sort of my personal experience. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. The link to that is in my bio on Instagram or jlight.substack.com. And of course, go watch the special, please. It's on YouTube. I'm very happy with how it's doing, and I want more people to see it. So if you haven't watched it yet, my wife hates these jokes. Go check it out. I think you're gonna like it, even if my wife doesn't. That's how it goes.
Jay Light, you heard it here. Go watch his special on YouTube. His wife hates those jokes so much. Uh, thanks for watching, everybody.